Hello, this video is about a modern classic composition known as Cyclic Six Maximus, composed by David Pipe. And I'm publishing the video close to the 25th anniversary of the first performance of this composition. So this is as it was published when it was rung for the first time, 21st of November, 1999. It was rung on handbells, which is quite unusual for the first performance of a quite difficult new composition with tricky methods. We can see the methods here: aerial, Phobos, Zanussi, Maypole, Deimos, Slinky. And of these methods, aerial, Zanussi, and Maypole were reasonably standard methods at the time. Phobos and Deimos were constructed especially for this composition, and Slinky, differential little treble place, to give it its full title, was also constructed especially for this composition, and we'll explain exactly how that works. Now, this composition is really very advanced ringing. It's been rung more than 100 times over the last 25 years, so it has become fairly popular. It's been rung by about 200 ringers in total, which is probably about 0.5% of all the ringers there are. So this is really at the extreme advanced end of ringing. But it's an extremely interesting composition. And what I want to do in this video is explain the composition, talk a little bit about methods, and later I will be joined by David Pipe, the composer, for an interview in which we'll discuss this composition, its origins, its features, and also some other compositions that David has produced during the subsequent 25 years. And right at the end of the video, I will come back to talk about another composition which has some similar features but is much, much simpler, being a quarter peal of major instead of a peal of Maximus. And that quarter peal composition gives a more accessible way for bands and ringers to experiment with the idea of cyclic splice without having to ring on 12 and learn difficult methods. So this is the composition. We'll come back to talk about this in more detail soon, but I want to point out a couple of things already. So first of all, what does the cyclic mean? Well, what it means is that this is an 11-part composition. So this block here, this sequence of methods, is rung 11 times in total. And what you see is that after ringing through the sequence of methods once, the row we get 1, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2, 3, 4, 5. So all the bells have shuffled round. This is known as a cyclic part end. It's cycled round. You do it 11 times, you get back where you started. And the point of this is to generate a certain kind of music during the composition based on runs of consecutive bells, either ascending or descending at different points in the row. And this structure of the cyclic 11 part is very good for maximizing the number of runs of consecutive bells, because, for example, if in one part you get a nice run of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, let's say a descending scale, then in another part that will become 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. In another part it'll be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Another interesting thing to notice about this composition is that there aren't any bobs. It's just a sequence of methods, no bobs at all. How can that possibly work? Well, the way it works is that the first method, Slinky, is specially designed so that it changes the coursing order. And you'll notice that this part end at the bottom here, the 1, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on, this is a different coursing order from the plain course, and that coursing order change is achieved by the lead of Slinky, and then you get this sequence of methods, 10 leads, incorporating 2 leads of each of the other methods, and those are all in the same course as each other because there are no bobs. Another thing we see here is a very elegant palindromic structure. So we've got the sequence Deimos, Phobos, Maypole, Aerial, Zanussi, and then it's repeated backwards: Zanussi, Aerial, Maypole, Phobos, Deimos. And this palindromic structure is also responsible for some elegant features of the composition. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. When we get on to the interview with David, we'll talk about not only the first performance of the Cyclic Six Maximus, but also this peel, which was run 3 months beforehand. This was the same composition, but with slightly different methods. And remarkably, we see that instead of Phobos, the very first time they ran Rigel, which is much, much more difficult. And instead of Deimos, there was a method called Priory Alliance, which is different, but not particularly more difficult. So in the interview with David, we'll discuss the evolution of the composition and its methods. We'll also talk more about the origin of the whole cyclic spliced idea, which was used in this peel back in 1993. This was the record length of Splice Surprise Maximus at the time. The record has subsequently been superseded by a peel in 39 methods, all the work. This one was 30 methods. And the composition used for this peel also had the cyclic 11-part structure that we'll be talking about with the Cyclic Six. And there's a bit of history about this peel as well, because the cyclic idea, in fact, originated in, one of the practice peels for the record length the previous year, and that was this one. It seems that for this particular practice peel, the band or the composer decided that it would be interesting to try a cyclic 11-part rather than an 11-part based on the lead ends of plain bob, and they liked it so much that a composition for the record length was produced using that same idea. We'll also talk a little bit about this peel in 1994, and this peel was the first one to use the idea of what's now known as a link method. This idea of instead of having a sequence of bobs to change the coursing order and produce the cyclic part end, to have a special purpose method, which in this case was Link's Little Alliance. And David Pipe's Cyclic Six uses a similar idea, but with a different method, which is the slinky differential little treble place. So here's the composition again. I've said about as much as I can just looking at this presentation of the composition, but what I want to do now is go through it lead by lead and comment on the methods as I do so. So first lead is Slinky, and I've highlighted the fifth and the sixth here, fifth in blue and the sixth in green, and we'll see why I've picked those particular bells as we go through. And what I'm going to show for each lead is the grid on the left when the method is first introduced, the actual rows and the line of that lead as it occurred in the first part of the composition. And when we show the rows of each lead, these green highlights, these are showing the musical part, so the runs of consecutive bells either ascending or descending. And I should say that all the diagrams in this video come from the website complib.org. So here is Slinky. And on the left, we can see it's got some very nice structure. This is quite pretty. We've got some fishtails here at the beginning of the lead, fishtails again at the end of the lead. In between, there's a block of, this is wrong hunting in the back 7 positions. On the front, we've got some hunting on 4. It then turns into hunting on 3, and there's a double dodge going on in 4/5. What's quite unusual about Slinky is the treble path. So the treble is plain hunting up to 4th place, but it does that twice during one lead. So even though the treble is going to 4th place and back twice here, this is actually just one lead of the method. So this is an unusual feature. And when you look at the full title of this method, it's Slinky differential little treble place. What does differential mean? It means that not all the bells do the same work as each other during the course. So what happens is that 2, 3, 4, and 5 are working among themselves near the front and get permuted. And the place bells from 6 up to 12, those are working among themselves at the back, and they get permuted, but they never mix. So there's no mixing between the front bells and the back bells. So what happens here is that you start off with a fishtail, which produces some nice musical runs. The bells in the back of the change then go into a block of wrong hunting. And a feature which actually helps significantly when ringing the method is that the bells wrong hunt until they get to another musical sequence, and then they stop and do a fishtail. And you can really ring it like this. You don't really have to learn which fishtail you do at the end of the lead. You just ring until you get to a roll up, and then stop and do a fishtail. And if you miss it, there'll be half a dozen other members of the band shouting fishtail at you. So it's hard to go wrong. So that's Slinky, and Slinky is the one that gets you into the coursing order for the next cyclic part end. And then you go into a sequence of more conventional methods. So lead 2 is Deimos. Now, Deimos, I think it's fair to say that most ringers, when learning Cyclic 6 for the first time, find Deimos to be the most difficult method. It has some unusual features that make it quite tricky. And the first unusual feature is that Deimos is not a surprise method, it's an alliance method. So what does that mean? It means the trebles path is not purely plain hunting, it's not purely treble bob hunting, it's something different. And what happens is that the treble starts off treble bob hunting, it does dodging 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it just plain hunts all the way to the back. And then it's reversed. So you've got this mixture. In the first part of the lead, you've got some pieces of work that you tend to find in treble dodging methods. And then during the central part of the lead, you've got some other pieces of work that are a bit more characteristic of plain methods. So how does it look? You've got some point blows right at the beginning, then a bit of wrong hunting, then some double dodges, a bit more hunting, some more point blows. And that's all quite straightforward. But then things start to get a little bit more complicated, especially when you get below the treble. So here we've got triple dodges in 4/5. So these are backstroke dodges. We think of those as right dodges. Triple dodges in 6/7. Again, backstroke dodges. But double dodges in 8/9, and these are handstroke dodges. So they're like Stedman or Granzer. So having these right dodges and wrong dodges going on simultaneously makes it a bit trickier to learn. Up at the back here around the treble, we've got these little bits of 3-bell hunting going on here between 8th and 10th places, here between 10th and 12th places, and we've also got some 3-bell hunting on the front, which is a pretty unusual thing to find in a method that in some parts of it at least is like a surprise method. These are triple dodges on the front, so that's straightforward. So that's Deimos. Here we can see all the musical runs. There are lots of them. And David designed the method exactly so that when rung at this point in the composition, it would produce lots of musical runs. If you were to ring a plain course of Deimos, which no one really ever does, it would not be particularly musical because you wouldn't be ringing the right leads. Now here you can see the 5th and the 6th in blue and green, and we'll start to see why I picked those particular bells. Here you can see that the 5th, the blue one, this is ringing the symmetrical place bell of the method, the pivot bell. You can see the work is just going to making thirds at the half lead and then reversing itself. The green line here, this is just doing a representative place bell in the method. But remember that the blue line was the pivot bell in this lead. So next we go to Phobos. Here's the grid. Phobos is a surprise method, so the treble is treble bob hunting throughout. We can see there is a lot of regular structure here, which again is very helpful in ringing. It's a method which is separated into a front work and a back work. The back work starts with some fishtails, then some more fishtails, and after that there's a big block of treble bob hunting until it becomes time to do more fishtails towards the end of the lead. On the front, the most distinctive feature is this big block of wrong hunting on the front 6, and you go into it with some point blows and you come out of it with some point blows. And then there are some other pieces of work below the treble at the beginning of the lead, which are a little bit more arbitrary and just have to be learned. Now, here are the rows that you get. Again, lots of runs, lots of roll-ups highlighted in green. and look at the green line here. So this is the sixth, and this is ringing the symmetrical lead, the pivot bell of the method. So in Deimos, it was the blue line that was the pivot bell, and now in Phobos, it's the green line. And here you can also see another feature which really helps when learning and ringing Phobos, which is that every place bell that's in the back work, it does fishtails at the beginning of the lead, and then when it does the fishtails again towards the end of the lead, they're in the same positions that they were in at the beginning of the lead. So this really helps to ring. You do your fishtails, and then you're doing treble bob hunting on the back six until you get to the same place that you did the fishtails in at the beginning, and you do some more fishtails, and that's it. Lead 4, Maypole. So Maypole is another alliance method. It's based on Bristol, but it's Bristol with the treble plain hunting through 5, 6, and 7, 8 instead of dodging in 5, 6, and 7, 8. If you know Bristol thoroughly, which ringers who are tackling Cyclic 6 usually do, then you can ring Maypole just by missing out all the wrong dodges that occur in Bristol. And actually, it almost makes Maypole more Bristol-y than Bristol, because if you think about Bristol Major and how it extends to Royal and Maximus, the appearance of the wrong dodges as part of the extension is a little bit, they don't correspond to anything in Major. They come in a bit arbitrarily, but Maypole doesn't have them, and so you can see in the grid that all the bells pass the treble just by making sliding places around the treble, whereas in Bristol Maximus, there are wrong dodges attached to these, and in some cases you're doing a dodge for the treble instead of just passing it. So in some ways, the structure of Maypole is even more elegant than Bristol. Here are the rows. Not quite so many runs in this particular lead. There might be more in some of the other parts. And here we see the blue line is ringing the pivot bell. So now we can really see a very interesting feature of the composition, which is that in each part, there are two bells that are alternately ringing pivot bells. In the first part, it's the fifth and the sixth, and that's why I put the lines on them. So in one lead, the fifth is the pivot bell, the next lead is the sixth, then it's the fifth, then it's the sixth, and so on. Okay, lead 5, aerial. Aerial is another method with a front work and a back work. The front work is a big block of wrong hunting, similar to Phobos, except now it's on the front 8, not just on the front 6. The back work starts with hunting to a point, reverse hunting to another point, then there's a little bit of treble bob work, then some more points, then a fishtail, and there's this triple dodge in 9, 10 across the half lead. And again, there's a bit of work below the treble at the beginning and end of the lead, which just looks a little bit arbitrary. Here we are with the rows. This time it's the turn of the sixth, the green line to be ringing the pivot bell. So there it is. Blue line is doing something different. You can see part of the front work. Again, you can see several runs appearing highlighted in green. And lead 6 is Zanussi. So this is the last method to be introduced. Zanussi has a back work which is quite similar to aerial. It's not exactly the same, but it does start with a point and then another point, and then it becomes a bit simpler than aerial. It's basically treble bob hunting, but just in the back 4 places once we get into the central part of the lead. What's happening on the front, this looks a little bit more complicated, but all these point blows here, these are in the same place in the lead that they would be in Bristol. So that's a nice familiar anchoring feature. There are dodges at the half lead in the front 8 positions, and then you've got the points again, just like Bristol, just after the half lead. And again, here we see lots of musical runs appearing. And this is now the apex of the palindrome, so then everything starts reversing. So we get another lead of Zanussi. It's now back to the 6th, ringing the pivot bell. Should have said in the first lead of Zanussi it was the 5th, and then it's aerial, and it's the 5th, ringing the pivot bell again. Maypole, which is the 6th, ringing the pivot bell. As you can see here, the symmetrical work. Phobos, which is the 5th, ringing the pivot bell, 11th place bell up at the back here. And again, lots and lots of runs in the Phobos. And finally, lead 11 is Deimos, and it's the 6th, ringing the pivot bell again. And this lead of Deimos brings us to the cyclic part end. Now, I want to say a bit more about exactly how this particular sequence of methods in the part works by covering all of the different lead ends within that course, because remember, there are no bobs in the part. So once we've got through the slinky, all the other leads are all part of the same course as each other. So I'm going to think about the play spells that the tenor becomes. So here I've put all the play spells in clockwise order around a circle, in the order that they would be in the play spell order of plain bob. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 11, 9, 7, 5, 3. So increasing even numbers and then decreasing odd numbers. And I'm going to think about the play spells that the tenor becomes through the part. So it starts off as 12th play spell, slinky, and at the end of the lead of slinky, the tenor becomes 7th play spell. And I'm going to put a red circle around 7 because we've rung that play spell. We don't want to repeat it again because we'd be ringing a lead end twice. The first method after slinky is Deimos, and the play spell order of Deimos is +1. What do I mean by that? I mean that ringing a lead of Deimos moves you one place clockwise around this circle of play spells. So +1 is actually the same play spell order as plain bob, which is what Deimos has. And so the tenor becomes 5th play spell there. It's a new play spell that it hasn't rung yet. The next lead is Phobos, and the play spell order of Phobos is -2. So it's going 2 places anti-clockwise around this circle. It's going in the opposite order of plain bob, but going 2 places. So -2 is the same play spell order as little bob, for example, or Cornwall, if you know Cornwall. And that takes the tenor to 9th play spell, which is a new one. Next method is Maypole, and the play spell order is +3. So what's happening is we're going back and forth around this circle in steps of increasing size. So we now get to 3rd play spell, which is another new one. And then we go into Ariel, which has play spell order -4, and that takes the tenor to 11th play spell. And then Zanussi has play spell order +5, which takes us to 2nd play spell. So this is going very well. We're getting a new play spell each time. What happens next? Well, it's another lead of Zanussi, which is +5, and that jumps the tenor round to 12th play spell. Now, the tenor did start the part as 12th play spell, but then we rang a lead of Slinky, which put us into a different course. So this 12th play spell here is not repeating. It's exactly what we want. Next, we've got Ariel, -4, which jumps us to 4th play spell. And what's happening now is in the second half of the part, we're jumping around in the circle of play spells in steps of decreasing size. And this is just filling in all the play spells that we haven't rung yet. So then we go to Maypole, +3, takes us to 10th play spell. Next, it's Phobos, -2, which goes to 6th play spell. And then it's Deimos, +1, which goes to 8th play spell. And that's the last one that we haven't rung yet. And this is the part end. So this is very nice. And you can really see exactly how this palindromic sequence works and why those particular methods work with the play spell orders that they have. I want to say a little bit about ringing Cyclic 6 on handbells. Now, I said at the beginning that Cyclic 6 is very advanced ringing, which a relatively very, very small proportion of people have done. Ringing it on handbells is even more rarefied and esoteric. It's only been rung about a dozen or so times on handbells by about 20 people. So this is an even smaller proportion of all the ringers there are. But it is quite interesting to look at some extra features of composition that appear when you ring it on handbells. So let's just have a quick look at that. This time I've highlighted the 7th and the 8th. And what I want to do now is not talk about the methods, but just talk about the play spells that are being rung. So firstly, the Slinky, there's not much to say about that. And then we go into Deimos, and we see 2 particular play spells being rung. It's 10th and 11th play spell, and that's fine. And then we go into Phobos, and this is where it starts to get interesting because we can now see that the seventh and the eighth are ringing a symmetrical lead. So it's the lead in which they cross at the half lead, and then in the second half of the lead, the eighth is doing the reverse of what the seventh did in the first half of the lead. And when you're ringing handbells, the symmetrical lead of a method is it's not necessarily an easy lead, but the fact that your pair crosses at the halfway point means that in the second half of the lead, you're doing the reverse of what you did in the first half. So it gives you a kind of familiar anchor. And what we're going to see happening when we look at this pair, 7 and 8, as we go through the part, is that in alternate parts, the pair is ringing a symmetrical lead. So here it is in Phobos. And then we go into Maypole, and we've just got two play spells. This is not symmetrical. But then we go into Aerial, and again, we can see the symmetrical lead being rung. The two bells are dodging together at the half lead, and then they take on each other's work for the second half. Zanussi, two particular play spells being rung. And then the second lead of Zanussi, again, this is a symmetrical lead. You can see 7 and 8 crossing it at the half lead. Aerial, this one looks a little bit as if it might be a symmetrical lead, but it actually isn't. The pair crosses here somewhere other than the half lead. But then we go into Maypole, and this is indeed the symmetrical lead of Maypole with the pair crossing in 2-3. And you can see the reflection about the horizontal axis in the lines here. Phobos, again, this looks a little bit as if it might be symmetrical, but it's not. 7-8 cross just before the half lead, not at the half lead. But then we get to Deimos, and this is the symmetrical lead with the pair crossing in 1-2 at the half lead. So I'm now going to be joined by David Pipe for the interview. And after the interview, keep watching because I will talk about the easy version of Cyclic Spliced, which is the court appeal of major. So stay tuned. Hello, David. Thank you for joining us. We're talking about your composition of Spliced Maximus, the one that's known as Cyclic Six, which has become quite a classic. It was first rung 25 years ago. We're recording this video a little bit ahead of time, but there are celebrations, performances planned for its 25th anniversary, I know. According to peelbase.co.uk, the composition has been rung 100 times. About 200 people altogether have rung it. You've rung it 25 times yourself, 15 times on tower bells and 10 on handbells, and you're the person who's conducted it the most times. Do you still enjoy ringing it and conducting it after those 25 years?
That's a good question, and first, yeah, thanks for having me on this discussion, Simon. It's certainly, say 25 years, but it doesn't feel like that. But it's really pleasing to see that it's been rung as much now as it ever was, and probably more so. And actually, it's a surprise when you said just then I'm the leading conductor, because I wouldn't have had me down as that. But it's certainly a composition I'm very proud of, and I have yet to grow tired of it. Indeed, and still discovering new things. Every time we ring it, I think, something I hadn't really seen or appreciated before. And it's one of these. I think it has a high musical reward for relatively, and I use the term loosely, but relatively little learning. So I think it's always right at the top of my list. If appeal organizer says what should we ring, given this band, and like I say, with the sort of return, your musical return for effort in, it's always top of the list. And so yeah, and to answer the question, I can see myself ringing it and not getting tired of it for many, many years to come.
And it must be extremely satisfying to have produced a composition which is regarded as a modern classic and probably is going to continue to stand the test of time.
Absolutely, and it's always nice as generations go on because when I first came up with it, of course, it was rung a fair amount. We rang it originally on handbells, but it was rung really by Tony Kench and his first Saturday band. They really got, I suppose, the popularity going. But what's great is, to see that these days young people coming up still aspiring, to ring it or to learn to ring it, and also the older ones amongst us now an older generation, but still choosing to ring it over and over again. So that certainly gives me a good sense of pride, shall we say.
Now, you mentioned that you first rang it on handbells, which actually is quite unusual for a new difficult composition. And in fact, you rang a precursor composition, you could say, also on handbells with more difficult methods because it had Rigel rather than Phobos, as the current composition does, and also Priory Alliance instead of Deimos. So how did it come about that first of all you did ring it on handbells first, and secondly, in terms of the evolution of the methods?
Um, so in terms of why we rang it on handbells, I guess, I mean, going back a few years before that, so in 1993, actually, I was part of the handbell band, and we rang a long length of Bristol Maximus, 15,000 odd, and the bands that rang that, but I suppose after we'd rung that, we met fairly regularly and started to ring, um, not long lengths, but just more standard stuff, but gradually, more complicated, up to including and even things like my dad's classic composition of Rabs, which to ring it in hand at the time was quite a challenge. Um, and so and also at the time, I guess that I came up with the Cyclic Six, the composition. I myself wasn't ringing that many cowbell peals. I got an arm injury, which ironically I still have, or it's it's come back a bit recently. So plus ça change in that sense. But yeah, I think the combination of the fact we had a ready-made handbell band and the fact I wasn't ringing much in tower. And I suppose also you could argue that getting six people together is much easier than getting 12 people together, but because it has to be the right six people. But we were fortunate, that we had that. Um, I mean, in terms, so as also, I suppose it probably explains a bit about the method choice. Like I said, we were quite familiar with Rabs, and I remember actually ringing quite a lot of Rigel in hand. So although Rigel undoubtedly is quite tricky, I suppose the band we had, being familiar with it, it was a natural choice. I mean, in terms of um, the cyclic composition itself, the one we're all familiar with, or the classic, has all the pivot bells are odd numbered bells. So you have, I mean, to use the current composition, you've got Demos is 3, Phobos is 11, Maypole is 5, same as Bristol, Ariel is 9, and Zanussi is 7. So that combination works, but also you can use all even bell pivots, and that also works. But because of the familiarity with or the number of odd bell pivot methods that we were ringing, Zanussi, Ariel, Bristol, or Maypole, and Rigel itself, the choice to go with that was pretty easy to make at the time. So the last method to include was one called Priory in that original composition, and again that was really just a filler. I think from memory it was sort of had a Bristol start, and
Mm.
so it was probably quite familiar and easy to ring. And but it was a little method, as in I think the treble only went up to tenths, um, and probably quite early on. I think I realised that that method, the Priory, but also the Rigel, although we were familiar with it, um, it generates a certain amount of music in that pivot lead, but it doesn't generate a huge amount. And so fairly early on, I can't remember whether it was before or after we scored, that first peel, but possibly before, I'd already made the decision that we probably needed to replace those two methods. And so we did, and that was eventually how Phobos and Demos were born.
And Phobos and Deimos were both constructed for that composition. They were rung and named for the first time in the peal you rang of the eventual composition.
Uh, absolutely. They custom built, as it were. And actually for Phobos, I remember coming up with it and being absolutely certain that someone else would have done so beforehand, because it was one of those methods that just seemed to just sort of
Yeah.
fall out of the pen, uh, as it was, pen and paper in those days that we were using to write it down. And so for that reason, I was convinced it would have been wrong, but obviously not. Demos was, of course, a different kettle of fish, and I was equally convinced that would not have yet been rung,
Yes.
and indeed so. I mean, not least because of the treble path, but I mean the whole thing about Demos is absolutely, it's designed purely just for the two leads that you ring of it, the plain course leads where 2 and 12 are pivot. I've certainly not rung any other leads of the plain course, and I can't imagine why anyone would. I'm not sure if anyone ever has. I'm sure probably someone has somewhere, but I can't imagine it would be that rewarding. So the whole point is to focus on. In fact, when composing it, the starting point is to write out the lead end row that you would ring in the peal. So, if 2 is going to be the pivot, it would start 1, 4, 2, 6. You start from that row and then write out the each row of the lead, and until the half lead, where you obviously need to make the 2 will be the bell making a place at the half lead, and then 3 and 4 will cross, and 5 and 6 will cross, and 7, 8. So that's how the composing was done, if you like. I would never start from rounds. I'd always start from the row that you get in the peal, and then it makes it a much easier task to to compose or to come up with a method that generates the music you want. And when you look at Demos, absolutely, it does that. Those double dodges you get at the beginning and end of the lead, they're all, you get 3 roll-ups at each of those. And then of course at the half lead under the treble, where you've got those double or triple dodges, again you get the roll-ups, because all the opposite bells at that point are dodging with each other.
So I'm sure I'm not the only ringer who finds Deimos the most difficult of the methods in the Cyclic Six. I think I remember Simon Linford once commenting that the great thing about methods like Zanussi and Phobos is that the features that make them musical also make them relatively easy. Think things like the fishtails, the blocks of hunting, and so on. But in Deimos, it's musical, but it's not so easy. I mean, are there any particular reasons for that? I mean, would it be possible to have an easier method where Deimos is?
It absolutely would, and I suppose thinking about it recently. I mean, you could, for instance, I suspect put Cambridge or rather Primrose, as the 12th place variant,
Hmm.
And that would be true if a little long. But like I say, when I would start with pencil and paper, and and really it's more about generating rows that have
Yeah.
musical roll-ups, um, thinking less really about the structure and the line. It just happened that that's how it came out. I think also I was keen for it to be an alliance method rather than a little method, just to give it a bit more dynamic feel, with the treble going all the way to the back. It sort of gives it that dynamism a bit. But yet it's still somewhat static, but in terms of bells, some bells don't move an awful lot,
Yeah.
but enough to make it interesting. And yeah, I don't, it's true to say I don't make it difficult for the sake of it, and
Sure.
then that's a key principle, I think, with any cyclic composition, and probably explains why Rigel would have been axed. Um, Arguably Rigel is unnecessarily complicated. Why would you have that backwork when it doesn't add to the music? It makes it interesting in other respects, and that's not, there is good reason to ring Rigel, but for a cyclic composition, certainly my premise and starting point is to focus as much as possible on the roll-ups, and arguably I think Demos does that. I know Philip Iris has claimed it as the most musical method he knows, where thirds is made at the half lead,
Ah,
which high praise indeed.
and it's no bad thing in a composition to have one method that is a bit more challenging than the others. Um, I would say, although I'm sure many ringers appreciate Phobos as an alternative to Rigel in that composition. Um, just sticking on the methods for a moment, any particular reason for the choice of names, Phobos and Deimos?
Um, well, I mean, obviously they were the moons of Mars, and I'm trying to think. It was probably, I suppose, started by, my dad was always keen on anything sort of astronomical, and so it was really being somewhat copycat. But I think as well the fact that there are effectively two recognized moons of Mars, and I had two new methods, so the moons of Mars seemed a good choice. I think that's probably all there was to that.
Now, I just wanted to return for a moment to the original peals on handbells. So you had your good handbell band. You came up with a composition that you wanted to try. Did you get it first time, or was that a project?
It's a good question, and my memory is a little hazy. I I don't. I'm pretty sure we didn't get it first time, but I certainly don't remember a struggle. It wasn't, it wasn't something that took months and months
Mhm.
to get. It was one that I think once we got the idea, it fell into place fairly easily, and probably in no small sense, we were definitely in practice at that time, and as I've already said, methods like Rigel, um, and Ariel and Zanussi, and we're all fairly familiar to us, and arguably those leads, those pivot leads, are the easiest ones to ring, and so even if you're in a cyclic rotation, they still hang together pretty well. That if you are really just transitioning from roll up to roll up, and as long as use that music, if you like, as a signpost, which definitely I do when I'm ringing this stuff. I'm always thinking, okay, the roll up comes here, and then this is how we get to the next roll up. Then that possibly is why we didn't have or didn't need that many attempts to score it.
And the composition has features on handbells beyond what you notice when you ring it on tower bells. So, for example, that your handbell pair is ringing symmetrical leads in alternate leads in most of the parts.
Exactly right. Arguably, the composition, you could say was created for handbells, but that wasn't specifically the case. But it's only when you do ring it on handbells that you recognize and appreciate that. And as you say, it's alternately you you'll be opposites and then in the opposite to the bell either side of them, and so and so on through the peal. Apart from, of course, the part where you are 2 and 12 at the course end, and then, but in those leads, every lead, one of your bells will be a pivot bell. So again, that almost makes the ringing of that part fairly straightforward as well.
And of course, all the inside pairs do the same work as each other. So there's no discussion about who's getting who rings the tenors or who rings a more difficult pair. They're all the same.
No, I suppose the only thing we sometimes think about is who gets the split parts at what point in the peal, and because in the classic, of course, five and six immediately get split because the 5 goes down to the front, 6 goes up to the back, and they're split for that part. So that's why DCB always used to ring 5/6, I think, for our peals.
Now, I wanted to talk a bit about the history of the cyclic idea for compositions. And I know that in 1993, you rang in a long peal of Splice Surprise Maximus, 15,840, 30 methods, all the work, which at the time was the record length of Splice Surprise Maximus. The record was superseded in 2017 by a peal that you also rang in. And the peal in 1993 did have a cyclic 11-part composition. Can you tell us a bit more about that peal and ringing the cyclic composition at that time?
It was a long time ago, and therefore exact memory is probably, there are probably others who can remember better than I can, but certainly it was at a time a bit of a departure from normal. But of course, when you're ringing that long, you run out of courses, of course, of standard tenors together stuff. So actually, the idea of having something like cyclic part ends made a lot of sense, and I think it was almost by accident. But the fact that you can bob a pair of bells through, for instance, have 2 and 3 running in and out with bobs on 5, then 7, then 9, then 11. So and then you're automatically in a cyclic rotation and of rounds. And I think in one of the practice peals, it was that was done and decided that would be a good structure for the peal, and that's how it turned out, and and it worked very well.
And the following year, in 1994, there was a composition by your father, Rod Pipe, which was a cyclic 11-part. The methods were Bristol, Maypole, and a method called links, which I think was the origin of the special link method in order to move between cyclic parts. Is that right?
Exactly so. And for me, that was a sea change in terms of cyclic peals, because instead of the consecutive bobs where a pair of bells runs in and runs out, this gave the cyclic rotation in a single lead. So recognizing, if you like, the power of that was key, and that was really the starting point, for the Cyclic Six composition itself, is knowing that feature was available. It was then more about okay, how can we then maximize the rest of the leads in the part to make it as musical as possible? And it was really then just recognizing that that having those leads in that order would do that. But absolutely the key to it all was, as you say, my dad's coming up with that method, that it wasn't. I mean, I remember ringing the peal and being, I suppose, bowled over by what it could do. But it's probably fair to say that just ringing it with Bristol and Maypole wasn't as exciting as
Mm.
it could be, and it was about recognizing that that more was possible.
So how did you come up with the particular palindromic structure that you used in the Cyclic Six? And the other difference compared with your dad's composition is that Cyclic Six has the link method right at the beginning of the part, whereas in the previous composition it was somewhere in the middle among the other
Yes,
beats.
yes, yeah, and there is, I guess, a story behind that, and still I remember the occasion. It happened one Saturday morning, and I woke up as I sometimes did in those days, thinking about compositions and specifically about how to maximize the number of plain course leads uh, that you could join together with 2 and 12 as or either 2 or 12 as a pivot bell. And actually, it didn't take long at all, I don't think, to work out that having those odd bell pivots, 3, 11, 5, 9, 7 in that order, and then their reverse could create that 10 lead block with alternating 2 and 12. Um, and but I needed to make sure that the link method, could be used to join those blocks of 10 leads together. Um, and I always kept a pen or pencil and pad in the bathroom. So I remember getting out of bed quite early and going into the bathroom just to scroll a little bit down on the pad. And it really didn't take long at all. Probably the whole thing was only about 20 minutes or half an hour. And that was, as I recall, sort of still pre 7 a.m. Um, and I do remember actually relating to Cecilia as she was just coming round that I might have come up with a new composition, um, but she was keener to know where her cup of tea was.
That must have been quite an exciting day. So how long did it take you to from that point when you had the composition and you finished the composition, and then of course you wanted to ring it? So how long did it take to get your handbell band together and organize the first attempt?
So I think, and again, my memory is not always the best, but I think I actually had a true composition even that same morning, just based on the scrawlings I'd had, because and again back to we'd already got Ariel, Zanussi, Rigel, Bristol, or Maypole as it would be. I think it did start life as Bristol though, originally, and then it was just a case of finding a link method that would do exactly or shift the bells in a cyclic position. And I vaguely recall I used the same sort of structure as my dad had used, with his link method, but recognizing you had to start from a different lead, and so but that was easy enough. I think he started from effectively the wrong, so needed a bell to sort of lie behind before they get the roll up, whereas I started effectively from the home, and that was why the link method starts as it does its first method in the in the peel. But that was what the pencil and paper did. It just proved that yes, that could be done and that was possible. And then even by that morning, I think we got something out that was true. it probably needed a bit of refinement, and as as you know, Priory came out of that, and then I imagine, and again, memory is somewhat hazy, but it wasn't that long at all, really, before we. I don't think the others needed persuading to go for it, shall we say? I think everyone was reasonably keen, and in those days we used to. In fact, the reason that first method was called Priory was because we met at Alex Burns' house, which was in Reading on Priory Avenue, and hence the name Priory. I think that was how that came about. Um, so yeah, my recollection is that it was a fairly short sort of time span between that, the coming up with it and executing it, because I think as well, 1999, it was the year Cecilia and I got married, and I know on our wedding day we attempted a peel of cyclic, but I'm pretty sure it was my dad's composition
Wow.
of Maypole, Bristol, and Lynx, which unfortunately we didn't score. I think there were other distractions that day, shall we
Sure.
say? But yeah, it was so. But what that does demonstrate is that at that point there was no inkling of the Cyclic Six composition, and yet it wasn't that long after, and well, it must have been by November. We were married in July 99, and by November, of course, that's when we first scored it. So it from conception through to to scoring, and bearing in mind, we had to there was quite large distances to travel. We certainly, I don't think, could meet every week. It was yeah, relatively short timescale.
And one nice thing about the link method actually is that you manage to make it also contribute to the music, which also helps to ring it because basically you wrong hunt and stop when you get to a roll up.
Exactly. So you've hit the nail on the head, Simon, and I mean, yeah. People say, is that by accident? Of course, yes, of course not. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole purpose. When and even with the methods themselves, demos, phobos, you know what leads you're going to ring, and so you make sure that you can maximize the music you get in those leads, and because it's a cyclic composition, that music will just repeat, but in a different cyclic position each part, and so 100% the whole idea is to make it as easy to ring as possible. We're not trying to create difficult compositions.
Now, there are quite a lot of variations of the composition. People have rung it with slightly different methods and different versions, but there are two that you might think of as official variations, which are quite popular. So there's one which is a slightly easier version, which doesn't have Deimos in it. It has, I think it's Glasgow Little. And there's also the 12-part version, which also doesn't have Deimos, but it's more difficult because it's variable treble, all the work for all 12 bells. So can you tell us how those particular variations came about?
Um, Not especially, only because I wasn't directly involved in that. I mean, I think it's nothing more complicated than people wanted an entry level composition. They possibly found the challenge of Demos um, a bit too much, especially if you've got lots of people ringing it for the first time. And so this was a stepping stone in that. And that again, I'm sure methods were chosen to be somewhat familiar. Everyone, well, most people who are attempting cyclic will be fairly familiar with Glasgow. You would think, and so I imagine that choice was fairly straightforward. There's probably loads of other methods you could choose as well to achieve the same thing. Um, from my perspective, I'd always prefer to ring Demos just
Yes.
because of it fills that niche perfectly, which the other methods don't. But again, it's good to have the choice.
And what about the 12-part version with the variable treble?
Yeah, so the 12 part is, and again, trying to remember back, but it was at the time, and as I've already mentioned, Tony Kench and his first Saturday band, they were very keen and rang the 11 part. I remember a few times, and I don't know whether I think possibly the suggestion of the 12 part came from either Tony or potentially so some of the people who were ringing it at that time, wouldn't it be good to have a 12 part? Um, so I wouldn't necessarily say I was forced into it, but the easy thing to do was what I did do, which was effectively to create a link method that instead of having getting back to a lead end where the treble was the treble, to have a different rotation such that a different bell would become the treble, and from there just to ring effectively the same composition. So, Demos, Demos, Phobos, but the problem, of course, is that you can't just ring Maypole because Maypole would generate backgrounds. So in the 11 part, you get backgrounds in the in Maypole, but of course in the 12 part, backgrounds is one of the effectively one of the section ends or one that you get from the link method. So yes, it needed, and that's where Glasgow with a Z, Glasgow Little was the replacement there for Maypole, I think. But essentially it was just the straight 11 part, but with a different link method bolted onto the front. And for that reason, from a personal perspective, I was never as big a fan of that 12 part as I was of the 11 part. And that's still the case today. I'd far rather ring the 11 part because, the 11 part was how it was designed. The ring it as a 12 part, you're effectively having a different bell as a treble in each part. And to me, it just doesn't sound right when you're listening to that bell
I see.
working its way through the change. So yes, that's how it came about. But like I say, it's probably I'm not as proud of that one as I am the 11 part.
I see. I think I mistakenly said that the 12 part doesn't have Deimos, but as you said, it's Maypole that gets replaced, not Deimos. Yeah. Good.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Yeah, you can well, and you can though you can replace the Demos with with whatever, and I suspect that has happened as well. But yeah, it's the Maypole that has to be replaced because of the backgrounds feature.
So we've looked back 25 years to the Cyclic Six composition, but you've produced quite a lot more compositions since then, including some more of Cyclic Maximus. So there's a composition known as the Moons of Jupiter, and then there's the composition known as Particles. Most recently, there's the Game of Thrones composition. So can you say a little bit about how those compositions have followed on from the original cyclic composition and what kind of evolution of ideas has gone into them?
Yeah, certainly there was has been some evolution, and Moons of Jupiter was probably the first step, and as I just said, the initial 12 part made no attempt really um, to to change the fact they were treble dominated methods or to do anything about it in terms of integrating the treble with the rest of the bells, because in a true 12 part the treble needs to be, or the treble, the treble place bell, even if it's not the treble, needs to be part of the music. So Moons of Jupiter was an attempt to integrate the treble path of fixed treble methods but into cyclic music. So instead of having a treble path where you just dodge up to the back and back down to the front, for instance, you might end up making 8/7, 8/7, 8/7 in the middle of a row where you've got, some bells hunting down from the back, and eventually at the half lead you'll get, you'll get the treble and the tenor in 7/8, and so 1, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, or something like that. And of course, in different cyclic parts, then you get all the cyclic rotations of that, and similarly front bells and everything. So Moons of Jupiter was an attempt to do that and make it feel more like a proper 12 part. And that was rung, I suppose, a fair bit in the 2000s, but less so recently. And if in fact it could be a decade or more, but since it's last been rung, and possibly it's just because I guess the methods themselves, they're not instantly familiar. People seem to like treble dominated methods, and again, that's possibly why Cyclic Six certainly has stood the test of time. But in thinking about Moons of Jupiter again, that's certainly worthwhile in its own right, although possibly it's been superseded, and I guess we'll come on to talk about particles and Game of Thrones as well. But I think that probably explains its position in the evolution. It was a 12 part, but where my dislike, if you like, of the treble path not taking part in the music, this was an attempt so that the treble would be part of the music, and hopefully it succeeded in some small way.
And am I right in saying that whereas in the Cyclic Six you've got the palindromic structure, so there's one palindromic block, whereas in Moons of Jupiter and the other subsequent compositions, you've kind of got two palindromic blocks aiming at different styles of music. Is that correct?
You're testing me now on Moons of Jupiter, but certainly in particles, yeah, that's definitely the case. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I suppose moving on to particles itself, that definitely, it was a combination of ideas. Again, it's about the, if you like, the idea for particles was really to think outside the box a bit. And again, it was another stage in the evolution, if you like, of the 12 part, because and trying to get away from treble dominated methods completely. So whereas even Moons of Jupiter, you still effectively had a treble, it was a treble dominated method. In particles, there is no treble, so all bells are involved. Certainly in that first section, the one that has all the particle methods, and those sections are essentially each one of the section ends is a combination of a forward roll up and a backward roll up. So at the end of the first lead, you have a backward roll up of 2, 1, and then a forward roll up 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you've got a 2 and a 10. And that's after top. After up, you end up with a 4 and an 8. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. So you have all, in fact, in that first block, you have all combinations of 2, 10, 4, 8, 6, 6, and then 8, 4, 10, 2. And then after the middle method, the meson, in this sort of, in the one that's currently rung, you get the reverse of all those. So where it was a forward roll up, it's now a backward roll up, and vice versa. So those leads, if you like, they give the complete set of those types of roll ups. It's always even number of bells in the roll up. I did think about having odd number of bells in the roll up. That makes it a lot more, well, makes a different challenge, shall we say. So once again, that was a sort of concept that I came up with, I suppose, in my head, thinking, well, in theory that sounds good. Then you have the challenge of putting it together. So that's where the method construction comes in, and I have to say that's for me, that's one of um, the excitements and the thrill of coming up with a new composition is you've got complete when you're doing something that no one's done before. It's just like you've got carte blanche. It's like, you know, can you imagine if you were the person that came up with Bristol Major or something like that? You know, and so that's definitely one of the you know, well, one of the draws of coming up with these compositions. So um, you know, having done that and then having the theory of that block, that particle block, when you put all that together, of course, it comes at the end of that block, you come back to actually it's a cyclic rotation of backgrounds because, as I said, the meson in the middle turns everything around. So what was forward becomes backward. So when you get to the back to the beginning, if you like, having rung that sort of palindromic block, instead of forward rounds, you're now backward rounds at hand stroke. So, but it's a cyclic rotation of backward rounds. So then it's like, okay, what do we do now? And you can from there just have a single lead like a link method to get you back to a part end. And there is still, you know, if any budding composers out there want to do it, you can probably come up with some longer particle methods and then just have a single lead on the end of it just to bring it to the part end. That would work. But what I chose was to, if you like, combine it with a megatitums block by having consecutively tenths and then eighths and sixths and fourths and place bobs and seconds place bob, if you want to call it a bob, and A group methods just to then get into the megatitums. And once you're in megatitums, any sort of principle or standard method will give you a different you'll get a different lead end, obviously, but it would still be in megatitums. And effectively, what that means is you've moved around, you've cycled around, and so essentially that method originally it was Quark, and now it's Baryon, I think, is the one that does the cyclic rotation for you. So that's the purpose of getting into megatitums. Then whatever lead you ring is going to take you to a rotation of you know, of that cyclic position. And you just need to make sure, especially in a 12 part, that you know it's not a multiple of 2, 3, 4, or 6. You've got to have something that is either 1 or 11 or 5 or 7 in terms of how it's going to move you through, just to make sure that you end up with a 12 part and, you know, and not a 4 part or a 6 part or a 2 part or anything like that.
And what about the Game of Thrones, which is the latest point you reached?
Well, yes, and so Game of Thrones, I have to say, is I was I was I was very pleased with it because uh, it feels that it, you know, finally it's a 12 part worthy to call itself an extension of the original 11 part. Um, so the structure, if you like, is the same palindrome exactly as the 11 part, but with the addition of a method or a principle in the middle of that palindrome, and that's the Targaryen, if you like. So that method sits in the middle of, well, what in the 11 part would be Zanussi, which you get round the middle of the part. It's like just putting a method in the middle of there. But what that does is join up the two halves in such a way, obviously, to, you know, to generate a 12 part that works, because there are various sort of slight constraints with it, but it's one of the key points is, whereas the 11 part, all of the regular methods have plain bob lead ends. In Game of Thrones, all of the non-cyclic methods, if you like, which is all the methods except Lannister and Targaryen, they all have lead ends from original. So effectively, and obviously original being, you know, plain Hunt on 12 means it has the same feel and the same if you like, logic in terms of the construction as the 11 part. Um, and and again, you know, it is the composition is a challenge for sure, because not having fixed treble methods does make it sort of inherently more difficult. But you get so much more freedom with the music. And so, for instance, I made sure to include a fair bit of Queen's style music, including, Queen's itself, which you get in the last part. So it certainly feels, like a true extension of the 11 part, and it's early days. It's been rung a few times, including once in hand. Um, so it would be nice to see it rung more. Will it ever be rung as much as 11 part? Is probably a fairly safe bet, no. But that's not a reason I would say not to attempt it. And anyone that feels they can or would want to, I don't think they'll be disappointed. So yeah, I'm excited about that, and then I guess the question then is what next? But I don't have any firm ideas about that yet. But well, actually, that's not quite true. I do have at least a proof of concept in terms of combining particles with Game of Thrones. So that wait and see how that comes out. But yeah, that could be an interesting one.
Well, we'll certainly look forward to seeing whatever the next idea is when it's run. Um, well, I think we've covered everything pretty thoroughly, David. So thank you for spending so much time talking about the ideas behind your compositions. Is there anything you think we haven't covered that you wanted to add?
Not from my side. I mean, it's been enjoyable to talk through it, and certainly it's nice going back over the evolution, if you like, of the cyclic compositions. Um, and yeah, it is quite thought provoking in many ways, just to see how things have changed, and actually it's good to see that there has been continuous, albeit it hasn't been that quick, but I suppose relatively over the time scale of the whole of ringing, it, it is moving. Things have moved on fairly quickly. When you look at what's being rung now compared to 30 years ago, it's so much different, and it's great to see. And like I said earlier, it's also good to see that the next generations are embracing that, and we look forward to those guys coming up with their own innovations in whether it's cyclic or whatever composition as well.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much again, David.
Thank you, Simon.
I promised to show you something a little bit easier, so here it is. This is a quarter peal of spliced major in 4 methods, so I call this the Cyclic 4 quarter peal. Instead of an 11 part, it's a 7 part, but we can see that there's a cyclic part end here, 1, 7, 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got a nice palindromic sequence of methods: Bristol, Albany, Hull, Hull, Albany, Bristol, and then 2 leads of something called Oxford differential little bob. This plays the role of the link method. The main difference between this quarter peal and the Cyclic 6 peal of Maximus is that in Cyclic 6 Maximus, the link method comes at the beginning of the part, whereas here, the link method comes at the end of the part. But other than that, this composition essentially has all the same features that the Maximus composition does. So I'll just go through and make some comments on the methods, and again show the grids and the lines, and also where the musical runs appear. So the first lead is Bristol. I won't say much about this. It's a very standard method. As I did before, I've highlighted the lines of the bells that are ringing the pivot place bells alternately. So here we've got the second ringing second place bell, which is the symmetrical place bell, the pivot bell in Bristol. The second lead is a method called Albany. So just as Phobos and Deimos were designed for the Maximus composition, Albany was designed for the major quarter peal. And it's really just designed to have the right place bell order that it needs to fit into that point in the composition. It is a bit unusual. What happens is it's based on treble bob hunting. All the bells are mainly doing treble bob hunting, except that the treble only goes to sixth place. So you have a triple dodge across the half lead at the back there. And to avoid the repetition that you would get with pure treble bob hunting, all the bells, including the treble, do Kent places instead of dodging as they go through 3/4. So this is what it looks like with the lines. This time we've got the eighth, the green line, ringing the pivot bell. And you can see that we've just got one little musical roll up here on the front occurring in Albany. And in general, this quarter peal is nowhere near as musical as the Maximus. There aren't as many runs. The runs that you do get are not as long, but at least you get some of them to illustrate the idea. Lead 3 is Hull. The second is ringing the pivot bell again. Hull Surprise Major is a straightforward extension of Hull Surprise Minor, which is one of the standard minor methods. You've got double dodges at the beginning and end of the lead. You've got treble bob hunting, but just down to third place, except not dodging in 3/4. You've got a bell doing something rather like Kent slow work, but in 3/4, and you've got long dodging for most of the lead in 1/2. And you get some nice roll-ups during the double dodges. Then we get another lead of Hull. This time it's the eighth, ringing the pivot bell, and you can see some more roll-ups again in the double dodges. Then the next lead of Albany. This time the second is ringing the pivot bell, and there's just one solitary roll-up near the half lead. And finally, the second lead of Bristol, where the eighth is ringing the pivot bell, and we've got a few more roll-ups. I said finally, but it's not quite finally, because we need to ring 2 leads of Oxford differential little bob in order to get to the cyclic part end. So Oxford differential little bob, this is a very short method. It's like ringing Oxford treble bob with the treble in the slow. You could also think of it as Basto little bob with Oxford places being made in 3/4, and ringing 2 leads of it takes us from 17856-342, which is one of the leads in the plain course, to 178-23456, which is the cyclic part end that we wanted. So that's all I have to say about cyclic compositions. I hope you found it interesting. Maybe you would like to try the quarter peal of Cyclic 4, even if you don't have the opportunity to ring the full scale Cyclic 6 Maximus. And that's all.